from neighbors of Slate Quarries, always referred to us by Act 250, from which this legislature has exempted the slate industry in the mid-1990s. The most recent outreach was from a man named Lou from Wells, who was referred to VCE by the chair of the Natural Resources Board. We followed up by taking a tour of the area and then hired a former DEC wetland staffer, Lindsay Harris, to conduct an investigation. Lou, who has health issues that prevent him from being here in person, has prepared a 10-minute video testimony that we will watch first. Then Lindsay will present the results of her investigation. And one of the first people who contacted VCE a decade ago, Jane Nicklaw of Castleton, will follow to describe her experience living in the Slate Belt. And we have timed it so that this will fit within an hour. So we will start now with Lou's testimony, and he introduces himself.
My name is Lou Vignani, and this is going to be my testimony on the Slate Quarry exemption to Act 250. I live in Wells, which is right in about the middle of the Slate Valley, which runs from West Pollock to West Castleton, approximately right on the New York-Vermont border. And Wells is in the middle. I'm going to try to make this concise, and I'll try to substantiate what I say with some pictures, and you can just stop this video, take a look at the URL, and verify what I'm saying to make sure the accuracy. Okay, so I want to start with a little history. The Slate Quarry exemption, as originally conceived, was understandable as well as being problematic. As you can see, the proposal as introduced would allow slate quarries that were being worked when Act 250 went into effect to continue their operations without going through the permitting process. I see this as understandable because everyone who owned property adjacent to a working quarry was well aware of it. But it was also problematic because it conflicted with the purpose of Act 250. Something which the people of this area were not meant to be exempted from. But the bill grandfathering existing quarries eventually morphed into an opportunity for anybody who had an old slate quarry on their property to register it with the state and have it exempted along with the active quarries. This was completed in '96 and allowed people to register any such existing quarry hole and have it exempted from Act 250. And the bill as passed regarded very little activity as substantial enough to warrant an Act 250 permit. In 1997, I opposed one such registration by Northeast developers on the property bordering mine to the east. I was unsuccessful, but my opposition resulted in John Ewing personally inspecting the 5 proposed quarries to be registered. And to my astonishment, a hole about 10 foot by 15 foot was approved for exemption and considered to be a quarry held in reserve. I was dumbfounded by this whole process, but as the law was written, the Profundi registration was as legitimate as any other and was approved. The end result left the slate industry virtually exempted from Act 250. I summarized this document requested from Bill Burke's office, listing all the quarries registered, and determined that over 400 quarries on more than 10,000 acres of land had been approved for exemption. The document is in PDF format and available from Bill Burke and relevant if you want to verify this. All these quarries are mostly invisible from the main highways of the area like routes 30, 4A, and 22A. To see what has happened, you really have to get off the main highway and travel dirt roads or view it from the air using Google Earth. The lack of any recourse to Act 250 has negatively affected the quality of life and property values for a good many Vermonters who neighbor these quarries, myself included. I saw someone on a WCAX interview who represented the slate industry say something like, if you buy a house next to a railroad track, you should expect to hear trains. Very smooth sounding analogy. But one more consistent with our reality would be more like buying a house next to an old cellar hole and seeing it turn into a Walmart. I bought my property before Act 250 and started building in 1971, the year it took effect. At that time, there were only a handful of Vermont quarries active within a mile of my house. The only one I was aware of, really, was Hilltop Slate. Since the exemption, there are countless quarries being operated within a mile of my house, and the quarries registered on the previously mentioned Profundi lands have been opened and are working up to my border. It goes without saying that the value of my property is greatly diminished by the presence of these quarries, and in summer, they can be operating from daylight till past dusk on any day. And this isn't a quiet operation. Shortly after Vermont passed Act 250, New York passed the Mined Land Reclamation Law of 1975. It establishes standards and practices for mining and quarrying that include things that should be important to Vermonters. The miner needs a plan on a survey map, for one thing. There are 25-foot setbacks from roads, property lines, and wetlands. Rubble piles cannot exceed a 30-degree gradient. Quarries must cover rubble piles with lighter material that supports vegetation. Gates and walls must be erected to prevent people from dumping garbage into pits or accidentally falling into them. Working hours are established and warnings sounded before blasting, and monies must be escrowed to assure reclamation is completed when the quarry is left. These kind of standards are a far saner approach to regulating the strip mining industry to make it less disturbing, disruptive, and objectionable to its neighbors. No such standards exist in Vermont, and the industry practices vary from one owner to the next. Practices appear to be self-developed, and some are better than others. One quarrier might avoid filling wetlands with rubble, and another does not. If you take a ride on back roads around here, you can readily see wetlands being filled with rubble at many sites. These pictures are all taken from dirt roads between Wells and Fairhaven, and are only a sample of what is commonly being done. Regarding the gradient of rubble piles, I would say that with few exceptions, they are as high and as steep as they can be made. This first picture is of a town road in Wells. It was marked as closed for many years, as Hilltop Slate expanded into the existing road and left the new road it created in such bad condition it was impassable to most vehicles. In 2014, for whatever reasons, two neighboring slate companies recreated the town road on the rubble pile you saw in the previous picture. Wells then gravelled and graded it. The gradient of the piles above and below this new road is clearly well in excess of 30 degrees, and that's typical. In contrast to what you've been seeing, this is a picture of a site owned by Vermont Slate on Route 149 in West Pollock. Here, reclamation has taken place. And if memory serves me, what we are looking at was once open pits and rubble piles, and is now storage, parking, and not at all unsightly. Why Vermont has filled in old holes and graded rubble piles is unknown to me, but it's a rare sight here. As for setbacks from property lines, they only exist where a quarry chooses to do so, unless some local requirement exists. Since there is no uniform code or even a survey required, disputes have arisen as a result of rubble piles being placed over borders that perhaps weren't even agreed upon before dumping started. In this next picture, the people who lived at this house brought suit against the company that dumped slate onto their land. And at present, the rubble pile goes almost to their border and continues to get higher each year. With respect to any concern for aesthetics, cleanliness, or regard for the environment, it goes without saying that, again, this is an individual thing. Because there is no uniform code and no oversight of these quarries, they do as they wish, and the people who see what they do have come to regard it as the norm. There is so much dumping of rubble going on, a multitude of sins can be covered with one load of rubble. Nevertheless, much of it is just left open to plain view, and the average local like myself has been conditioned to ignore it. What is happening now isn't just going to affect the people of this area. The boom that is taking place now in the industry will one day pass, and left in its wake will be countless pits, filled with water and connected by roads accessible to vehicles. It would be incredibly naive to think that people won't use them for recreation and dumping sites. They have in the past, they are now, and they will in the future. I tried unsuccessfully to find articles from the Rutland Herald concerning dumping into quarries, but they're on microfiche and not readily accessible. But I clearly recall that a neighbor of mine was caught allowing tire companies to dump used tires in a quarry pit. My town used a quarry filled with water as the official town dump for many years before and after I came here. And many others have been used unofficially as dumps. A native Vermonter once warned some of us swimming in a roadside quarry that it had been used as a dump when he was a kid. What these pictures show is just a small sampling of the accessibility to these pits and some of what is taking place as we speak. When the quarry stopped working, activities died down, and posted signs fade and the gates are unhinged, is when the real industrial strength damage is going to occur. The problems experienced by people living near quarries would not be happening if we had restrictions similar to New York. Dangerous rubble piles would be graded and covered with vegetation. Pits would be filled with rubble or permanently obstructed to discourage dumping. And possibly the most important change would be in the attitude of citizens towards the quarries, their uses and abuses. You may consider it speculation, but the people I speak with will not raise issues with quarriers. There is a fear of reprisals, a very real fear, and a sense that they have all the power and we have none. They're mostly right because the legislature has provided this exemption. That's about all I have to say, and I truly hope that this legislature is persuaded by the testimonies you've heard to remedy a problem that was created by the Slate Quarry exemption. Thank you very much for hearing me out, and please do something to remedy this.
Just the regular days. Good morning and thank you. My name is Lindsay Harris. I'm from Tunbridge, Vermont. My background is in environmental science. I worked as district wetland ecologist for the Department of Environmental Conservation in 2006 and 2007. I'm currently working on behalf of Vermonters for a Clean Environment. As Annette mentioned, VCE conducted an investigation of issues in the slate industry. This presentation outlines the results of that investigation. We uncovered many issues. One area of greatest concern were numerous large-scale wetlands filling violations. This picture shows one example. This is a large waste rubble pile having been dumped into a regulated wetland that's contiguous to the Hubbardton River. I'll give you more examples of other wetland fill sites later. First, I'd like to give you a bit of an overview. This is a locator map of the Slate Valley. As Lou said, it's in Rutland County between Fairhaven, Castleton, and West Paulet to the south. It's right along the New York border. It's within the Poultney-Meadowy watershed, which drains into Lake Champlain. Some of the largest mines are up in the hills above Lake St. Catherine. Lake St. Catherine hosts a rare species of aquatic plant. It also brings many tourists to the region. And there are a lot of second homes, vacation homes on Lake St. Catherine that represent a significant proportion of the tax base in Poultney and Wells. These are aerial images showing the scale and scope of the industry. So this is roughly the Slate Valley here. It's about 17 miles long. The next one is zoomed in area right here. This is Lake St. Catherine, and the red line represents 2.65 miles. Now we're zooming in a little bit more to this area here. You can see 3/4 of a mile long by 1/4 mile wide in this case. These are huge strip mines. They completely disfigure the landscape. Giant pits are dug, like this one right here, to expose working faces where slabs of rock are harvested. More than 90% of what comes out of the pits ends up as waste rubble, and the waste is piled on site into large, steep constructed landforms. Here's a view inside one of the pits. Surface water, rainwater, groundwater all flow into these, and they must be constantly pumped out. Again, these are strip mines. They completely obliterate all features of the natural landscape. Our investigation consisted of aerial image and map analysis. We conducted on-site field visits and interviewed local residents. We also did legal and historical research. So we took a pretty close look at what's happening in the industry, and we found some disturbing practices, like wetlands filling, illegal discharges to waters of the state, illegal dumping, toxic spills. There are no standards for or set hours of operation required. Waste piles are excessively steep with no regulations on the slope. There are no survey maps required, no land use plans required. Blasting is completely unregulated. There are no setbacks from roads or residential property. We found examples of encroachment onto private property. There are no reclamation plans or monies in escrow required. There are often dangerous site conditions. These are large open pits. There are no fences or gates required. And as Lou discussed, local residents are feeling intimidated by operators. Incredibly, these mines are largely exempted from Act 250. In the 1990s, the slate industry was allowed to register quarry hulls as existing, so as to be exempted from Act 250 even through significant changes in use, significant changes in scale, and even through a sale. Very small pilot holes, sometimes the size of a hot tub, could be grandfathered, and therefore forever exempt from Act 250 no matter what size mines they eventually turned into. This exemption has led to unchecked development and leaves residents feeling powerless and uninformed. This is an example of an Act 250 exemption application from 1996. This is the entire written portion of the application. They were short, simple applications, often with hand-drawn maps as attachments. Here are the maps that were submitted with this application. This is a tax map here with the location of the quarry sketched in. And this is a hand-drawn site map that accompanied the application. These are the photos that accompanied the application. They show, quote, existing on-site operations. We have an existing building, existing equipment. This is the existing quarry hole with the man standing here for scale. Here's the Act 250 jurisdictional opinion. It finds, quote, in this area here, the subject slate quarry pre-existed Act 250 and is not abandoned, unquote. It also finds that, quote, changes to the quarry will not require a land use permit, unquote. In this section, it does warn the quarry operator that, quote, the jurisdictional opinion does not relieve the quarry operator of the obligation to obtain such other permits from the state of Vermont, unquote. And it gives the contact information for the A&R permit specialist. So this is clear evidence that quarry operators have been warned of their obligation to follow other environmental laws, even though they've been exempted from Act 250. So we have a legal process in place where theoretically something this size can turn into something like this without ever triggering the Act 250 process. These maps are another example of that accompanied an application from 1994 or 1996, excuse me. This is a rudimentary site map here, and here are the quarry hole locations drawn onto the topographic map. This is work that I did using the time-lapse tool in Google Earth. So this first image here is was taken in 1994, and then these symbols show the location of the quarry holes that were registered on the maps in the previous slide. Now this image is the exact same scale and exact same location. You can see where the road's going through, except it's from 2011, so this is 17 years later. So in some cases, what were individually registered quarry holes are now indistinguishable. So you can see these individual holes are now one large operation. They've morphed into larger operations. Up here is another example that now encompass multiple registered holes. And the Act 250 exemption even allows quarry operators to purchase adjacent property and continue to expand originally registered holes onto new parcels without triggering the Act 250 process. To give you a sense of the scale of this development, the next slide is going to be an aerial photograph that encompasses this area, just this area here in the red box. This image was taken last summer in 2014, and you can see the homes here for scale. So although these mines are largely exempt from Act 250, we found clear violations of other state and federal environmental laws, such as the Federal Clean Water Act, the Vermont Water Pollution Control Act, the Vermont Wetlands Rules, Vermont Solid Waste Laws, and state and federal hazardous waste laws. As I mentioned earlier, one area of great concern is the extensive illegal wetlands filling that's going on. This photo I took in December of 2014 shows new fill in a regulated wetland. I have two additional sites I'd like to talk about today as examples of filling violations, but I want to emphasize that we found many more sites than I can talk about today. Illegal wetlands filling is happening at a large scale, and it's an industry-wide issue. This is analysis I did using the Google Earth time-lapse feature again. These are images from a greenstone slate site. So this wetland here is a large mapped, regulated wetland complex. I drew in this white line here to show the where the interface between the wetland and the mine come together in 2011. And the extent of the filling. And then I kept the same location, same scale, and I turned the clock back to 1994, so we can see what fill has gone in these 17 years. There's this stream channel here, completely gone by 2011. This represents thousands of square feet of illegal wetlands filling. I use the same technique to analyze a hilltop slate site. The red arrows are for spatial reference. This is also a large regulated wetland complex known locally as Bullfrog Hollow. So here's the photograph from 1994, 2011. So you can see where the fill's gone in. Now this site here, I found to have fill roughly this size during a field visit. So that fill is newer than 2011, and I have documentation of that next. So these are photos that I took at this site. I took these photos in December of 2014. they have the geographic data embedded in the file. So the camera has a GPS on it. So what it does is it plots exactly where I'm standing on top of the most recent available orthophoto image. So this is the 2011 orthophoto image. And it shows me standing right here, and this is the direction I'm pointing the camera. So you can see on the 2011 image, I would have been standing in the middle of a wetland, except here I am standing on this new rubble pile taking the photo. This is roughly the same place, just pointing the camera in a different direction. So here I am, what I would have been standing in the middle of a wetland, except now in 2014 I'm standing on top of a new rubble pile. Now we have this is the same site, so this is about where I was standing taking those photos. And we have some flyover video to show you. So this red dot is going to show the flight path of the video. So it comes down the valley in the wetland and then goes back up. You'll see this featured very prominently in the video. Over. Oh, wait. Can you help me with that? Oh, there you go. Okay, so we're coming down the valley. This is the wetland complex. This is the landform that is visible on the 2011 orthophoto images. This is the area of brand new fill. So while this is wetland, this is a large regulated wetland. Now we're going to turn around. There's the landform. We're coming back up the valley. And now this is going back up to Hilltop Road. There's some garbage and tires. And this is Hilltop Road. Oh, just a little closer in. Here are some stills from the flyover. Again, this is the prominent landform that is visible in 2011. Here's the area of brand new fill. And then this is the Bullfrog Hollow wetland complex. Here's one more example of wetland filling at a greenstone slate site. I use the same technique, as you can see. A lot of fill going in here over time. 1994, 2003, 2011. These are photos from that site that I took in 2014, in December of 2014. Again, with the geographic data embedded. So here's the orthophoto. There's me pointing the camera due east, right directly at the rubble pile. Here again, here's me pointing south, looking into the regulated wetland with the rubble pile. We also found many active illegal discharges while we were on site. In order to legally discharge to waters of the state, operators are required to have a National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System permit. It's a mouthful. NPDES permit. As far as we know, and according to A&R, no NPDES permits have been issued to slate mines in Vermont. So I have a video here. This is an active discharge in progress. This is a diesel pump, and here goes the outflow pipe. So it's in the pit, and it's heading up out of the pit. This is a still from the video too, so you can see a wider view. And I couldn't see where the pipe was coming out because of access issues. But this is a regulated wetland here. The wetland is back over here in their direction the pipe was headed. Here's another example of an illegal discharge that I observed in progress. Here's the diesel pump and the pipe heading out. And it's heading out towards a ditch that runs into the Hubbardton River. We found illegal dumping to be a huge problem in the slate industry. There's evidence that operators are dumping scrap metal, tires, garbage, and mishandling industrial lubricants. Locals also have a very strong cultural history of using quarry pits as garbage dumps and also as shooting ranges. When I was looking through some historic documents, I found a lease from 1907 from a landowner to a quarry operator. And the lease actually had a provision in it specifically allowing the operator to use the quarry pit as a garbage dump. Then the town dump in Wells, or the old town dump in Wells, is an old quarry pit as well. So since there's no reclamation or regrading required, the whole region is left pockmarked with these large pits. There is no fencing, no barriers required, and the pits get used as dumps. You know, we all know how expensive legal waste disposal is. In this region, illegal dumping in quarry holes it's cheap, it's easy, it's normal, and it's been happening for hundreds of years. You know, just like we don't allow raw sewage to flow into our rivers and lakes anymore, we should really clean up this outdated practice. Some of the spills we observed were large enough to be reportable. We found a lot of tire dumping going on.
We're chuckling, excuses. We just did 2 hours of tires downstairs.
So you're sick of tires. We'll move on. This is the village of West Paulet. In some cases, these mines come right up into people's backyards. Sometimes they are people's backyards. There are steep, dangerous waste piles dumped up to, sometimes over, property lines. Many residents are feeling intimidated by operators. Citizens are reporting retaliation by operators in response to requests and complaints. The lack of land use planning and setbacks is negatively impacting the quality of life and, of course, property values. The unchecked development of grandfathered pilot holes has left the community with no input and no warning of where, when, or how quarrying activity will occur, and no recourse. These pictures show the interface between mines and residents. Very intimate.
Yeah.
These red lines on the aerial photo represent property boundaries, and you can see here the rubble pile is encroaching onto private property. Here's another example of that. One more example of that. As Lou told you, in 1975, New York State passed the Mine Land Reclamation Act. It established a set of common sense rules for slate quarries, such as standards and practices for operations, required mining plans that requires setbacks from roads and property lines. It limits the slope of waste piles, requires that waste piles be revegetated, requires gates and walls to prevent dumping and unauthorized access, requires set working hours, blast warnings, and also requires the mines to have reclamation money in escrow for when they're no longer operational. Vermonters for a Clean Environment is asking that the legislature repeal the Act 250 exemptions for all operational slate quarries. Also, we're asking that the legislature work with ANR, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and EPA to bring all quarries into compliance with existing law. This will serve to bring Vermont's slate industry into the 21st century. It'll level the playing field by having the slate industry follow the same rules as all other extractive industries in Vermont. And it will serve to greatly improve the quality of life for Vermonters in this region. Thank you very much.
And I just just wanted to give you a little bit of insight of what it's like to live close to a quarry. And you've seen all the things that have been mentioned in the last two reports, and I also want to thank you for the time for listening to me. Basically, we bought our house in 1992. It was a nice house in a residential area. To give you an idea, our house sits right here, and we have quarries to the back of our property. We actually, when we bought the house, had a residential piece of property here that we thought would buffer where we lived from the quarry. When we bought the property, there was a small quarry here that was flooded, and it had been closed. There was trees growing up in it, and all the local residents used to go fishing and stuff there. Then there was what they called a berm, which is like a wall of rock, and it divided that quarry, which was filled with water and had been closed for a long while, from this quarry here, which was operating, at the time we bought the house, it was only operating in a milling capacity. Now, when we, at one point, the industry, I guess, decided they were going to open the other quarry, and it was purchased by somebody else. And we found out that usually they have to be permitted if the quarries are closed for a certain portion of time and they're not operating. In fact, this quarry right here was also closed, and as they mentioned really quickly, they have to go and apply for a permit from the town. Okay, there are certain parts in these permits, as they said, they're very vague on the pictures that they give them. Like here's one, it just has a really roughly hand-drawn sketch of where the quarry is going to be, the one that's being permitted for is going to look like. And then there's another little piece of it. But then there are some things in here that pertain to some of the problems we've been having. It says blasting and extraction of rock, although undisputedly carried on in the past, has been abandoned for such a long period of time that they no longer qualify for such treatment. And then it says to reinstitute such operations is an expansion of non-conforming use. So in our town, this is actually considered a non-conforming use. Okay, and as such, the activities must meet certain criteria. And then it talks about how it's set forth in a section 250. What they said was there's going to be little increase in traffic will be generated by the proposed operation, and no actual expansion of buildings or structures is planned. Okay, if the hours of operation are limited and the liability insurance is obtained, there is no likelihood of adverse effect on the surrounding properties. Okay, so they changed it just to give you an idea of what it looks like now. I'm sorry, this one picture I didn't have blown up. This is in reference, this is to the north of our property. The neighbors have this little building out here. When we first bought the place, there was no dumping visible at all from our, where we're standing in our yard here. A couple of years later, and this is on what they consider was zoned a residential property. This wasn't part of the permitted quarry. You can see the slate starting to be dumped over the building here. And this is what it looks like now. Just to show everybody. That's what we have to look at every day. Yeah, we can pass them around. So that gives you the idea. So the noise and the aesthetics of our property has been absolutely ruined. It's decreased our property value. We also had some safety issues. We actually had to bring about 2 nuisance lawsuits. The first one was because the blasting was getting worse, and we had blasts that occurred after dark at night, and they were so bad it felt like a major earthquake. I mean, people from over the line just south of our house in Pulteney, everybody was calling everybody. They were scared to death. We had no idea where this big, huge blast had come from, but it shook everybody's houses. People started having some structural damage to their houses, including ours. Our wells were contaminated. A lot of people had E. coli contamination. We had fluoride, which is salt, So it actually would eat your faucets up, it ate our outside Hardy wood stove up, which is made out of stainless steel. So you can picture, this wasn't really thin material, it was actually pretty thick, sheet material, and it ate right through it, the water. So, that's pretty scary in itself. That only occurred when the blasting started. We've had encroachment onto our property, and we had to, like I said, initiate a nuisance lawsuit just because of that, and then a lot of the neighbors also had other issues, so we did one. After that happened, we thought things would get better. We were sadly mistaken. In 2006, we had a blast that occurred that sent what they call rock, it's called fly rock, out of the quarry behind our house, and it actually landed, hit houses across the street. That gives you any idea. It landed all up on our property in our yard. It split, I'll give you an example. It took a doorway we had in the upper part of our house. We have an older section that's 230 years old and one section that's 180 years old. It shook the two so bad that it actually splintered a door and just, twisted it that badly. I was outside at the time. I remember the situation vividly. The whole yard suddenly became full of dust. You couldn't see a thing. We had large pieces of rock land into the yard, and they were hitting, and they'd explode like shrapnel. And you can see here one piece where it landed in our driveway, another one here, and it actually blew a hole in the ground right here, right next to this building, which was like 50 feet from my house. And you can see I get very emotional over this because I've had to deal with it so many times. Okay, and then another time, the next blast we had happen, which is only ones that we've documented. This was in 2006. We had been clearing our property over in this section here, and about 3 days later, my son went out and he was taking a walk, and he came upon hundreds of pieces of rock which had landed. And the state police came out and investigated and everything. They took pictures, and you can see with using the ruler how big these chunks of rock were. And they actually landed up in my garden and out where my horses were. And it actually sheared the bark off of trees, and I have some blown up pictures so you can see that. Here's some different trees. So you can imagine what this would do if you want to pass these around. You can see the bark. What it actually would have done if it had hit someone. Okay, and through all this, we tried contacting state and local and government officials. In regards to the blasting, we were told there's nothing they can do. MSHA, the state police, I guess, actually license them, but they don't have any control over the amount of blasting used, what's being done at all. And MSHA the only thing they can do is protect the quarry workers. The public has no protection whatsoever. Any laws regarding that. And they're not required to cover their blast sites, even if they are close to houses. So the rock has to go somewhere. And in this picture, it shows there was one big hole that was blasted. And we have state police reports and town reports. How they keep saying they blast the rock to the north. There's only one problem. This being north, this being south, that being to the east, my property's to the west. That hole was blasted into the rock, and where was that rock going to go? Of course it was going to come my way. There's no other way it could go. It was either up or my way. It's really hard to talk to anybody, trying to get any help, because they keep pushing you from one place to the next and saying, this one doesn't regulate it, somebody else does. You call them, they say no. And the bottom line is they all bring down to the fact that they're not under Act 250, so there's no rules and regulations against any of them. Any rules they have to follow. I don't know. I think a lot of this speaks for itself. And the other thing we've had a lot of issues with is dumping. They've picked a nice place right where I have full view of it in my backyard to dump tires. Numerous times we've had to have the town health official come out and actually talk to the quarry and have them pick the trash up. And I don't know why they keep doing it. I mean, it's a repeat thing. They know they shouldn't be doing it, and they do it again. And I'd like to see them come back under Act 250 just for the safety, benefits it might afford us, and anything else that could help us. And I appreciate it, and thank you very much.
Thank you. That was pretty interesting testimony in front of the committee, and it was a question to the committee about whether we wanted to go forward with anything, but I'll hold that question for later. I gather there's no local zoning?
There is,
There is.
but they say they're exempt because of Act 250.
So exempt from local zoning because of Act 250. Okay. And the blasting protection laws?
They're all done through Act 250.
Right, okay.
And for the record, again, this is an so.
Okay. Right, but I'm just trying to get my head around, where to grab hold of this.
Because of the work that we've done on mining issues, when I looked at this, Lou was suggesting we need a law like the New York law. And I said, well, actually, we just need the ANR permits to be enforced, and we need Act 250, because it will do. So it does. Ed was here actually because he was a district coordinator, so you can confirm with him. But what it does is it places conditions on hours of operation, on blasting. It requires blasting plans. It requires mining and reclamation plans. So rather than just going and opening up the mountain, you actually have a plan for staging. So all of these issues, to me, just look very normal to just bring back into Act 250. And Act 250 has done a very good job in Rutland County with regulating quarries. They know how to do it. It's standard practice. Some of us have sat through hours and hours and hours of testimony on blasting issues, and for the most part, it's very effective.
All right. As I said, this was a question to the committee, and
I would like to see Secretary Markowitz and our staff see the same evidence and come tell me why we shouldn't be upset.
and John Groveman, Chair of the board.
And we have been trying to do our due diligence, and so Lindsay has given this presentation to the head of the Wetlands Division. She's also met with Mike Adams at the Army Corps. We think that there may actually be some enforcement going on, but we don't have any details about it regarding at least some of what's happening. I mean, I want to be really clear. We're not trying to play gotcha. For those of you who are here with the slate industry, we're not trying to hurt or shut down anybody, but every other extraction industry complies with rules, and I'm kind of hoping that maybe Rock of Ages and OMIA and Pike Industries, for instance, might work to help the industry understand what rules they operate under and help them come into the system in a way that will work for everyone. But we do want to see the most egregious things stopped, and we have been making every effort. I've been having regular contacts with Matt Chapman, the General Counsel of DEC, to make sure that they are aware, and I know that he's had conversations with Commissioner Mears.
Are there people from the slate industry here present?
Yeah.
Yes.
Who emailed me?
That was me.
That was you? Okay,
Yeah.
good.
I'm Jonathan Hill. I'm one of the ones that was accused of dumping in the wetlands. However, they didn't have their property lines completely correct. Not suggesting that there isn't an issue. I'm not saying that there aren't things that could be done to improve our situation, but a lot of what you're seeing is possibly neighbor versus an individual quarry. So there are some things in our industry. We are regulated by both ATF Bureau of Mines, the towns. We have to, basically in good faith, do things to prevent garbage from getting in our properties. I was with Deb a couple weeks ago, or beginning of the year, because I'm very concerned about some of the new trash laws that are going into effect and how they could affect my property, because we would become a target for illegal dumping. I recycle. I can speak for myself. Mm-hmm. There are issues that need to be dealt with, and a lot of it is neighbor versus neighbor, and we do see a lot of illegal dumping in our area, but it wouldn't matter whether it's not necessarily us. I did see some big tires, things like that get left around. They shouldn't. I'm going to say that they should be there. I don't know how to, if changing this and losing our Act 250 status, I don't really know what that would do to the industry. I don't know that anybody's addressed that, looked at it. We do employ a lot of people. I personally have, knock on wood today, have no issues with my neighbors. I take care of my neighbors. I make sure that I'm not doing anything that would affect them in any ways. Most of us are responsible. We do have some wild men that are in our industry. They are not necessarily regulated the way they need to be, but I'm not necessarily sure that Act 250 would stop them. There are rules in place that could, short of arresting some of them. Yeah, go right ahead, Craig.
I'm Craig Marker. I'm with Vermont Structural Slate in Fairhaven. And I would say that, there's a lot of what I saw today that really bothers me as an owner-operator and have been doing it for 150 plus years. But keep in mind that you're talking about 2 or 3 situations. There's, I don't know how many operating quarries, maybe 100. So I guess the question is whether, the exemption that we worked hard to obtain, the governor gave the legislature back in the mid-90s, needs to be removed, or just existing laws need to be enforced. And whether they're individual situations or industry situations. I would argue they're individual, and that there are the means to correct a lot of what we saw today without having to repeal the exemption.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'd like to just say that back in
For the record, your name.
Sean Tamara, Tamara Slate. Back in 1995, they give a 1-year study moratorium. That's what they called it. 3 senators, 3 House members, Kurt McCormick, Perry Waite, Danny Duell, and then John Bloomer, late John Bloomer, Betty Fierro, and Senator McCauley. They brought the bill to the floor, or they brought the bill into the chamber the next year, and there were 3 people in the House that voted against it, and the Senate passed it 29-0-1, and Governor Dean passed the bill. So what was shown today, we looked at we found out Monday that this was happening. What was shown today, I think it looks pretty one-sided. There's no question. There's 95% of the dumps that are in the slate industry were created before the 1900s. There was a picture shown of 4 or 5 dumps around the trailer. That's next to a quarry. Years ago, back 100 years ago, a lot of quarries had a 50-acre property, and they sold the quarry rights and the dumping rights for all those 50 acres around the quarry. And I'm very sure that that's Barney Rubble's property next to Hilltop. And I don't even know if it's Barney Rubble's property. I think it's Hilltop's property, and Hilltop lets them live there for nothing. And it's in the trailer that when the wind blows, you can stand on the other side of the trailer and you get like, you know, the wind is like blowing against you because there's that. It's just you're showing some footage that looks tough to see against the eye, but I think when you dig down to find the facts, like they did back in 1996, one of the Democratic legislators said back in 1996, and it was I think it was Kurt McCormick. He went to countless neighbors in Rutland County, and he said on the record that the only people that are in Rutland County that are upset with the slate industry are somebody that's looking to get something for nothing.
Well,
And
if we could, that, if you will, anecdotal information, and we are not addressing individuals, we are addressing the situation. I agree that bill passed. It is the law. That's where we are. The question is whether or not we want to move forward with this. It isn't going to happen this year. This isn't going to be an immediate kind of thing. Nothing will happen by next week or by the end of the session or anything like that. It's just a situation that was brought to my attention, and I wanted to ask the committee if we should move forward. And oh, he's left. Oh, well. Oh, no, there you are.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry, right here, I just moved.
Yeah, if we do decide to go forward, you guys will be sitting in that chair, and we will talk with you, through the process and think about it. So this was, to bring up the issue today. But thank you. I'm glad you guys showed up, and I had extended an invitation.
Thank you.
So
There's one fact that I think you should know that I didn't hear, and that is that there are now 400 registered quarry holes. There's a whole drawer at Act 250. We actually have a scan of every exemption, so there's 400 of them. The other point I think is important to note is that in our work we noticed that the system that we have with Act 250 has really largely prevented nuisance lawsuits. And so when we see nuisance lawsuits and we hear they're nuisance lawsuits, that shows there are problems. And we think that Act 250 has done a very good job. So yes, there may be individual issues which are very difficult to deal with, but that's one of the things that Act 250 does. And having seen and had direct experience with these other mining companies, to know the standards that they comply with, I think that this is something that will not harm the industry.
And I keep hearing that. I was here in '96, and I may have been one of the 2 or 3 that voted against it, but I can't remember. But the whole slate issue came up because there was a bigger bill about exemption from 250
For all the quarries, I understand.
for granite,
And the other thing is
so
that somebody who does hazardous waste training, who I sent the photos to and said, what do you think? He said, well, there's reportable spills and there's all kinds of violations here. Said, if you had told me in the late 80s or 90s that there was even any activity in the slate belt, I would have told you were crazy. So apparently, and other people have said this, it was a very small, relatively quiet thing, and it made sense to do this.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
If we do go further on this, then in fact we'll find out what happened to the market to get everybody back up. But okay, and for now, I really do have to end this because we've got a long day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thank you.